Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining me on episode 5 of our little mini-series on disclosure. We've covered quite a bit in the first 4 episodes, and we've continually asked the same question. What are these objects? Well, today we're going to ask a different question, maybe even a more dangerous one. Who is telling you what they mean and why you should believe them? Because here's what happens the moment a release like this lands. A row of serious people step forward. Former defense officials, intelligence veterans, even a Harvard physicist, even investigative journalists. And they all start telling you what it signifies. Some say this is the edge of the biggest story in human history. Some say it's a managed distraction. Some even say the government is hiding recovered craft, and every one of them has a CV that makes you want to just nod and believe them. This is definitely something I struggle with disclosure as a whole. The amount of unofficial leaked whistleblowers is sometimes really hard to distinguish what is truth and what is fiction. So today, we're going to do something that might feel a bit uncomfortable. We're going to take the credentialed voices seriously, and then we're going to apply the exact same standard we do to everything and the footage that they show. Because a 4-star reputation is not the same as a piece of evidence. And the oldest trick in the book, in this entire subject, is one that goes like this. Trust me, I've seen the classified version. So let's start with one of the loudest voices in the room, Ross Coulthart. Coulthart is a veteran investigative journalist who has spent years on the same story for News Nation. And he is not a hype man by trade, which is what makes his reaction interesting. On the first release, he was scathing. He called it underwhelming and accused the Pentagon, more or less, of trying to bore the public to death, drowning the signal in dull, pre-public material. Then came the second release, and his tone shifted hard. He went on air and warned, in a line that travelled around the world, that if these crafts are real and not human-made, then in his words, quote, we are not the apex predator anymore. Now sit with that a second, because it's genuinely quite a chilling sentence. It's also, when you look at it, at the cold interpretation, if these crafts are real, if they are not human, if the measurements hold. Each if is doing a lot of work here, and none of them is settled by the files we've actually seen. Coulthart's sharpest point is a fair one, and I'll give it the full weight. He says the government has never directly addressed the central claim, whether it has covertly recovered non-human technology, and that it has, in his words, avoided it altogether. Now that's a real observation. A non-denial is not a confession, but is a thing that is worth noticing. And Coulthart has earned the right to notice it. The leap from they won't answer the question to we've lost our place at the top of the food chain, well, that is his leap, not the evidence response. But we've got to respect the journalist, and we have to understand that leap. One more insider before we widen out, because he represents a whole archetype. Luis Elizondo. Elizondo is the former head of the Pentagon program that studied these very phenomena, often credited with helping get the Navy videos into public view in the first place. He's since written a book on it, and like Coulthart, he found the first release underwhelming. Too much old, already circulated material, not enough of what he says is really being held back. He's the purest example of a specific, powerful figure within this story, the insider who left and then went public. The archetype deserves genuine respect. It takes something to walk out of the building and say the official line is incomplete. But the same rules apply, and I'm not going to bend it for him. The insider who went public is more credible than a random voice. He was in the room. He still is, though, telling you about evidence that you can't see, filtered through his memory, his interpretation, and yes, a book with his name on the cover. If he's right, it's enormous. His sincerity I don't doubt, but sincerity plus access plus a publishing deal is still not a craft on the table, and we've got to weigh that heavily. We can't weigh him as proof. Now, the voice I'd weigh most heavily, because he's the one trying hardest not to fool himself. Avi Loeb, a Harvard theoretical physicist. He runs a project dedicated to actually instrumenting the sky and looking for anomalies with hard science rather than grainy clips. And his verdict on the release is the least exciting, and to my mind, probably the most trustworthy of the lot. He called the files a mixed bag, some explainable, some genuinely mystifying. No apex predator warnings, no promises of imminent revelation, just some of this noise, some of this is interesting, and the way forward is to stop arguing about old footage and start collecting new, calibrated data with proper instruments and open scientific review. That's it. That's what intellectual honesty sounds like on this subject. It's not always thrilling. It probably won't trend. But notice a difference between Loeb and almost everyone else. He's not asking for you to trust his clearance or his contacts. He's asking you to build better instruments and check for yourself. A man who wants to verify is worth more than a man who wants you to believe. And we've got to remember that every time someone on this topic leans forward and tries to tell their version of the story and what they can show you. Which brings us to the credential trap. And we've got to walk through this carefully because it cuts in a direction people don't always like. Among the people urging the public to take this seriously are genuinely senior figures. Christopher Mellon, a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence. His line after the first release was simple and sharp. For years, he said, the public was told that there was little to see. Former Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe has spoken about objects doing things that are hard to explain. These aren't basement bloggers. These are people who held some level of the most sensitive clearance in the United States. And here's the uncomfortable thing that has to be said. None of that, not one rank, not one clearance, not one distinguished career, is evidence about the objects. It's evidence that serious people take the objects and subject seriously. And these are different claims. A former intelligence chief saying we should look into this tells you there is a question that is legitimate. It does not tell you the answer. History is full of brilliant, credentialed, honest people who were confidently wrong. Not because they lied, but because they too were working on incomplete data and human intuition. Credentials earn a hearing. They do not earn a verdict. The moment we let someone's resume do the thinking for you, you've stopped investigating and just started following. And following is how the field has been led in the same circles for nearly 70 years. Now the claim under all of it, the one everything else orbits, the recovered crafts. In 2023, a former Air Force intelligence officer named David Grusch testified under oath to Congress that the United States has operated a secret program to retrieve and study non-human craft, hidden from the public and congressional oversight. Since then, other reporting has surfaced on alleged programs, some have called by a code name, sourced to a newer whistleblower who, by journalists' account, was not part of the existing circle of believers, which, if true, would make it harder to dismiss as people simply echoing each other. So let's try and be exact, because this is where careful people and careless people part ways. What we have is sworn testimony and journalistic sourcing alleging crash-retrieval programs. What we do not have is a craft, a piece of material, a document the public can examine that can confirm it. And that distinction is everything. Sworn testimony is of course meaningful. Lying to Congress is a crime, and a named official staking his reputation is not nothing. But testimony describing secret evidence is not the same as the evidence. A man can be honest, credentialed, brave, and still be relaying something he was told rather than something he can prove. And I don't want to be calling these people liars. I honestly don't think they are. But I am saying that someone with credentials saying that the proof exists somewhere but I can't show you is structurally the single most unfalsifiable claim in the entire subject. It can never be checked and never be killed. And a claim that can never be tested is a claim that you have to hold at arm's length, no matter how much you want to believe it to be true. And that newer whistleblower detail matters more than it sounds, because it lands right on the fault line between believers and the skeptics. The skeptics' strongest explanation for all the insider claims is circular reporting, a closed loop of the same people citing one another until the echo starts to sound like a chorus. If a fresh source with no existing link to the independent circle describes the same hidden program that's much harder to wave off as an echo, harder but not impossible, we still cannot see what this person saw. An independent claim of secret evidence is still a claim of secret evidence. It raises the odds that something is real. It does not put the something on the table as definitive. Now I have to do the thing this channel will always do, give the skeptics their strongest punch undiluted. Because we've spent a lot of breath on the believers and fairness demands the other side gets the best shot. We don't want to have this as a straw man argument. The serious, skeptical position isn't everyone's an idiot. It has two prongs, and both have teeth. The first is social contagion. The argument, belief in this spreads and reinforces itself the way mass panic always has. People prime each other on what to expect. Ambiguous sides get slotted into the expected story. Witnesses unconsciously align their own accounts, and a feedback loop builds that feels like an overwhelming evidence. But it is really overwhelming repetition. They point to historical panics as the template, episodes where huge numbers of sincere people reported things that simply weren't there. And that mechanism is real. It happens. You cannot wave it away just because it's inconvenient. And the second prong is a little sharper. And believers hate it more because it's documented. The United States government has, at times, actively used and tolerated UFO mythology as cover. Secret aircraft, early spy planes flying higher than anything else in the sky, generated genuine UFO reports. And there's evidence officials were content to let the flying saucer story stand rather than reveal a classified jet. Think about what that does to the whole field. It means some of the most credible sounding cases in history may have been perfectly terrestrial. They may have had a perfectly secret explanation, and it means the government has a proven track record of letting the public believe in aliens when the truth was just an aircraft it didn't want you to see. So when the same government opens a UFO portal, the skeptic's question is brutal and fair. Is this disclosure, or is it, for one more time, the cover story doing exactly the job it's always done? I think this lands reasonably well with me, whereas I absolutely believe there is things that we can't explain and things we probably should have caution for and need to know more about. I do think disclosure is used as a smokescreen on military tech. Where that military tech come from is a different argument, and maybe at times it was reverse engineered. But I think a lot of the sightings that are claimed to have seen probably has human origin. But here's the twist almost nobody saw coming. The disclosure movement is now turning on the disclosure. You'd expect the people who fought for years to be celebrating, and some are, but the same investigative journalists who hyped the second release also reported something stranger, that people inside the administration were quietly reaching out with concerns. That this rolling release process is not, in their view, in the spirit of true disclosure. Even the NASA administration reportedly framed the early material as old reports being dumped and forgotten, with pressure from the top to produce a real thing rather than the archive scraps. So look at the strange shape of the room now. You have believers who say the government is hiding recovered craft. You have skeptics, and these are serious people too, who argue the entire phenomenon is in large part the product of decades of government disinformation and social contagion, the way a panic spreads and feeds on itself. You have a faction who think the release are real but deliberately boring, a bureaucratic shrug dressed as a transparency, and you have a faction who fear the opposite, that genuine material is being slipped out in a way designed to discredit it. Buried among the balloons, 4 camps, all articulate, all credentialed, all certain in their own ways. And the files in the middle of that are supposed to settle it. However, they're just causing more dispute and argument. So how do you, sitting at home, actually navigate a room full of confident experts who all disagree with each other? Well, here's a method, and it's the whole point of today. 3 rules. 1. Separate the person's credibility from their claim's evidence. Always. A trustworthy person can make an unsupported claim, and the claim is still unsupported. Their honesty doesn't transfer to the proposition. Secondly, weight people by what they're asking you to do. Someone asking you to verify, to build instruments, examine documents, check the data, is probably operating in good faith. Someone asking you to believe on the strength of access, on something they can't share, is asking for faith, not assent. Faith is fine in a church. It's a poison in an investigation. And finally, number 3, notice who profits from your certainty. Books sell on revelation. Channels grow on apocalypse. Careers are built on being the one who was right about the biggest story ever. That includes people like me, so you've got to apply it to me too. If I ever tell you something is certain, you've got to be suspicious. The honest position on this subject is very rarely certainty. It's calibrated, restless, evidence-hungry doubt. And here's the practical tell, how to spot the difference between a real insider and a performer, because clearly both exist, and at first they often sound identical. A credible source gets more specific and more careful under scrutiny. Press them with a hard question, and they narrow the claim. Admit the limits of what they personally witnessed. Separate what they know from what they were merely told. A performer does the exact opposite. Under pressure, they get vaguer. The claim balloons. The timeline slips. The proof is always just about to arrive. And the goalposts drift steadily towards whatever can't be checked. So watch it next time anyone on the subject is questioning hard. Do they shrink? Does their claim fit what they actually defend? Or inflate it to escape the question? The honest one contracts under pressure. The grifter expands. It's the most reliable tell there is, and it works on believers and debunkers in exactly the same way. But here's the thing that should keep us all grounded through all of the noise. Every single one of these figures, the believers, the skeptics, the journalists and the physicists, is looking at the same files you can look at for yourself. Now they may have context that you and I don't, but on the public material, they have no secret insight. The portal is open for all of us. So you're not actually dependent on their interpretations. You can read the Rock Pinnacle case. You can watch the Lake Huron clips, and you can apply the tiers, primary, testimony and interpretation yourself. The experts are starting to point, not as an authority. The most radical thing these whole releases make possible is that for once, you don't have to take anyone else's word for it. So where does the human layer leave us? My honest verdict on the voices? Well, Coulthart asks the right questions, but then can sometimes over-answer it. Loeb models exactly how to think about this, but gets the fewest clicks for it. Mellon and the other senior officials makes the subject legitimate without making it proven. And Grusch and the whistleblowers have given us the most explosive claim and the least examinable evidence, sworn words pointing at proof none of us hold. Add it up and the pattern is clear. The credentials in this story are real. The convictions are sincere. And not one of them changes what the files actually support. The people are a map of who believes what. They are not the territory. And notice the quiet tragedy in that. These are, for the most part, not charlatans. Coulthart has chased this honesty for years. Loeb is one of the most cited scientists alive, and Mellon and Grusch put their reputation on the line. The problem isn't that they're lying. It's that sincerity and seniority simply cannot manufacture proof that isn't there yet. A room full of honest, brilliant people pointing at the same locked door does not make that locked door open. It just tells you that a lot of serious people believe there's something behind it. And that is worth knowing, but it's not the same as knowing what is behind it. So trust nobody at this point. Follow no certainty. Weigh every voice, including mine, by whether it hands you a way to check or just asks you to kneel. In the next episode, the final of this run, we pull all the way back, 80 years of this, from the first reports to pursue, and then ask the only question that's really left to ask. Is there any of this that is heading anywhere, somewhere, or have we been walking in the same circle since 1947? For now, though, your turn. Of all the voices shouting about the release, which ones do you trust, and why do you trust them? And be honest, is it because they showed you, or because of who they are? Tell me in the comments below, and as ever, if we've misrepresented or misinformed, please let us know how, why, and where we can get better. Thank you very much for listening. Until the next time, follow the evidence.